Peace and love, everyone. I'm Jay Rube, and I'm making this video today to talk about the fake Independence Day that a lot of folks are out here celebrating and are not aware of. Those of you may probably already know the information that I'm probably already going to be speaking on. So if you have anything to add, please add it in the comments. If you don't know, but would love to investigate this information further, I suggest making sure you have a pen and paper to write down these dates, contracts, and books so that you can be able to, investigate further, because it's all about learning from our mistakes and to be able to grow further from this, because it's all about being able to build from this right here. So with that said, let's get started. So in order to understand, about this Independence Day, we have to understand how it got started and where it started at. It got started by the American Revolutionary War. The American Revolutionary War was nothing but a war started between Great Britain, France, and and America, or the United States, to be able to put the people in the United States further in debt. And we're going to get much deeper into that. So that was that whole war was about. It was basically about Masons, the Masonic Lodge full of Masons who had control over these particular quote unquote nations to be able to put the people over here in debt. So, and it got started with the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Federation was 10 or 12 men who actually created a document on November 15, 1777. Write that down. They created it on November 15, 1777. However, it did not get ratified until March 1st, 1781. The term ratify means to approve or to confirm. So make confirm. So, and during that time period of doing that, they did not have any money. So this is why it took so long for them to actually ratify, is because they were trying to figure out ways of how to get money. They got the money from from England. They actually borrowed money from England. Now, during this time period, they were still going through the American Revolutionary War. They borrowed money from the Crown of England. The Crown of England is King George III. So if you want more information on him, go get the books Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2 by David McRitchie, Sex and Race by J.A. Rogers, Volumes 1 and 2. Get those two books. That way you can learn more about King George III, his wife, Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg, because they were both brothers and sisters. They had melanin and they had an afro. You'll see in the book where King George got a big old afro, dead serious. So you'll be able to learn more about him. But let's get back into it. But he was a brother. And so with that being said, he was the ruler over Ireland, England, and France. The ruler over France because of the Treaty of Peace, which gave him access to the treasury that was in France. So this gets further into him actually being able to fund both sides of the war, because the actual United States was actually begging money to be able to start their nation while they were fighting a war with Great Britain at the same time. See where I'm going with that? So King George was actually fronting them money and beating them up at the same time. You got to be able to think like, what's going on here? It was because so they can be able to put the people that were over here, the quote unquote people that was over here, in debt. So with that said, you get into how much money did they borrow? They borrowed 18 million French livres. Livre means silver in French. So, and it was 21 separate loans. They borrowed it on February 28, 1778 to July 5th, 1782. Now, this was before, listen now, this loans got started before the actual ratification of that actual Articles of Confederation. Now, I want to read this to you because this is Article 12 of the Articles of Confederation. I want to read this to you. All bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, or debts contracted by or under the authorities of Congress before the assemblies of the United States shall be deemed or considered a charge against the United States for payment and satisfaction whereof the United States and public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. That means that they solemnly pledged to pay back any debt that was before the ratification of the Articles of Confederation. So that means that the United States is in debt to Great Britain, King George III, 18 million in silver, and they have to pay that back because it was something that happened before the ratification of the actual Articles of Confederation. So they have to honor that. This is what makes a loan. We'll get into that later, but this is what makes a loan stronger than reparations. But we'll get into that later. A loan is something you have to pay back. If you don't pay it back, there's penalties, interest, etc. They get piled on top of you to where it makes the amount. You know when some of you miss your car payments or something like that, that interest rate go up. That's what happened with them. That's what's going on with them. But we'll get into that later. So that gets into who King George was a little bit and what he was doing and what was going on in this time period, because he was actually putting these parties in debt so that he can put, the quote unquote pales in debt. It's just that by a byproduct, these pales got some of us to contract in, and then some of us contracted in. And we'll get into how that happened as well. So, as you notice, the American Revolution was nothing more than a trick way to get folks in debt. So, and since these Articles of Confederation or the pre-United States was already in debt, it was bankrupt. So they had to revise it so they can try to get themselves out of bankrupt. This is why they revised the actual Article of Confederation into what is known as now the United States Constitution. That was revised or ratified on September 17, 1787. By this time, the debt had already kicked in to where they actually had to pay that back. So, and 12 delegates approved this Constitution. Now, listen to this. The Constitution in the United States, because they did this, became what is known as constitutors. And you can look this up in your Black Laws Dictionary, editions 4th and 6th editions. Constitutors is one by who a simple agreement becomes responsible for the payment of another's debt. Now, because of that, they revised it, became constitutors, meaning that they had to pay back this debt. So, with that said, this gets into what I want to get into. Sharing this. A few sections out of the actual United States Constitution that actually deals with this. So, you get into the United States Constitution, Article 6, Section 1. Listen to this. Now, you can all look this up. All debts, contracted or engagements entered into before the adoption of the Constitution shall be valid against the United States Constitution as under the Confederation. This means that any debt that was placed upon the United States before the ratification of this Constitution, they're implied to pay back the debt. They're talking about them loans that they took out prior with King George III. So that gets into, they're still in debt. So technically, they've never actually been an actual nation. They just been a corporation or parties that collect debt. This gets into a statute that I found. The statute is the Republica versus Sweers 1 Dallas 43 Treaty of Commerce. It states that America is a British colony. The United States is a corporation, not a landmass. Right? Because the thing is, though, in order to be a nation, you have to be solvent, you have to be independent, you have to be able to create your own money, etc. That means no borrowing money either. So by them borrowing money, they actually suspended not only their sovereignty, but their nationality, and they became subjects to the crown of England. And we'll get into what King George did on a later date. So, and also I want to read this too, from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2. Congress has the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. You see that? You see that right there? That lets you know that these particular parties are not a nation. A nation doesn't borrow money on credit. Credit is nothing but debt. So by them borrowing money, they place themselves under the jurisdiction of the Crown of England, and they've been that way ever since then. So, but also as well, this gets into, well, how do the quote unquote the people fall into this? Well, this gets into, since the states were, at this time period, the states were liable for the debt, not the people. However, they did this by, on August 4th, 1790, they made an act they made an act. The act is called an act making provisions for the payment of the debt of the United States. You can look that up yourself. You can find that from 1 United States Statutes at Large, page 138 to 178. This act actually took the actual not only took this act took the debt from the states and placed it upon the quote unquote the people, and they did that by allowing votes. See where I'm going with this? So they got people to be able to participate in quote unquote voting, so they can be able to count you. So voting is nothing but them be able to count you to see, all right, who's a quote unquote citizen, so we can get them to be able to pay back this debt. That's all it is about. That's all it's about. It's about them being able to pay back this debt to the Crown of England. And they're using these particular parties at their expense. Well, the people, which is we the people, means we the state. Because the term, so that means that these particular parties, or these quote unquote people, are now subject to the United States, who the United States are subject to the Crown of England. So now the people are paying taxes to the United States, which goes strictly to the Crown of England. Now you see where I'm going with that? And this gets into, how do the melanin people fall into this? Well, actually, we weren't supposed to fall into it. We just voluntarily got placed into it, mainly because of what's known as the 3/5 clause. The 3/5 clause was nothing. It wasn't about them. Of course, it was about them saying, "Oh, we're 3/5 of a quote unquote natural person, or quote unquote at this time a person." But it was also about them being able to collect taxes off of us. The whole point of United States Constitution, they wanted to be able to collect taxes off of the actual slaves. So they would tax slave owners to be able to get the money from them to be able to pay back England. So this whole thing is about paying back England. It's not about them receiving independence. That's fake. It's not about them freeing quote unquote slaves. That was a lie, because it was slaves at that time period being enslaved. Well, quote unquote melanin people being enslaved at this time period, so they can be able to collect taxes over it. It's about them taking the money to be able to pay back England. That's all it's about, because they're in debt. So they're trying to pay back. Of course, they want to be like Pinky in the Brain and take over the world, but it's a science to it. They're all partnering together in the same Masonic lodge so that they can be able to not only pay back this debt, but also keep these certain quote unquote group of quote unquote people in debt and in servitude. That's all it's about. Right? Now, solutions. What are solutions? The solutions to this issue is you have to, one is, and the thing is, though, a lot of folks try to get into, I have to find my bloodline. For one, you don't need, of course, you want to find your bloodline for personal or ancestral references, as far as finding it out for your personal self to be able to teach your children. But that doesn't go into your nationality and fixing the issue, because we're all melanin people are connected to this planet. We're the first here. We're the aboriginals to this planet. That's said and done. There's so much documentation that can be able to prove that. The issue is getting folks to realize that it's about you actually aligning yourself with an actual nation to get yourself out of this situation. So that's what nationality is talking about, and that's what we have to really focus on as far as unity aspects coming together. It's about finding common ground for us to be able to build together as a nation. There are so many solutions to be able to fix these problems. We have to just be able to take time to listen to one another, to be able to understand what we are, where we are, and where we're going. That's what we have to be able to do. So I just want to share that information. Hopefully you all like this. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to be able to look up some of the reference I gave you. If you have anything to share, please drop it in the comments and everything. So with that said, everyone, peace, love, and light to all of you.